Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Gaming the System, the podcast where three intersectional feminists examine gaming and games through a feminist lens. Today, I am your host, Matt, and I'm joined by my friends Alex and Jem. Before we get started, if you want to support us, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem for some exclusive content, or you can send us a one-off donation via PayPal to our email address, wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com.
So, welcome back to part 2 of our discussions of Game Over, Apocalypses and Dystopias. We've just finished recording our episode on apocalypses, so we have had no break in the meantime, like you will have had. You'll have had at least a week to come to terms with the existential crises that we've revealed for you. So, if it's bad for you, think about how it is for us. We're going to talk about the more hopeful side of things, because dystopias aren't post-apocalypses, although there are some post-apocalypse dystopias. They're not, interchangeable. So dystopias, for example, sci-fi spends a lot of time in dystopias compared to... There aren't many fantasy dystopias, I don't think. Maybe we'll discuss that as we go forward. So, we started off with defining apocalypses. How would you both define dystopias?
I think a dystopia is where the human race hasn't been almost erased, but society is living under drastically worsened conditions. So usually under the thumb of a really evil government or a corporation of some kind or a tyrant. And the way of living has changed and it's very oppressive. And there's usually a protagonist, so you'd be playing or watching a protagonist who stands up against that and tries to overturn the regime. And it's usually a big battle between some very small sets of resistance and some very big empire-like tyranny.
Yeah, I think all of that. I think it's usually a world where capitalism and technology have won out over nature and community. And I think that might be why we see more sci-fi dystopians than fantasy dystopians, because they are fantasy tends to have a more natural element to it, and that's obviously undermined by undermined by the lack of sort of technological disaster and capitalist or fascist attitudes. So I think that it is interesting that how little we see fantasy dystopias, but I suppose it depends on whose side you're on. Because if you look at Lord of the Rings, in some ways that's quite dystopian.
I was thinking
Shire, is like a little safe bubble within sort of dystopian land where you've got, it's so bad that the elves are all leaving, and
I was thinking, what about the Hunger Games? Is that more of a fantasy dystopia than a sci-fi dystopia? Because that's a pretty big one. Yeah, definitely.
But I can't believe that's never occurred to me before, that the Lord of the Rings is a dystopia, because the Shire's lovely, but as soon as you get out of that, you've got the goblins in the mountains that they go into fucking the Mine of Moria, and that's post-apocalyptic. Everyone's gone and everyone's dead. Rivendell's nice. Lothlorien's nice. But then you've got Saruman, and the White Wizard Saruman the Wise becomes Saruman the Mad, and you've got the Dark Lord rising in the east, and You've got the Easterlings and the Southrons invading from the south and the east. You've got the pirates. Oh God, I could go.
We should just watch Lord of the Rings.
That's all we should do.
Let's do that.
So good.
Yeah.
But then we've got the only people who can save us is the Aragorn and Sam. It's all Sam really. Sam literally carries Frodo for the last bit, and Frodo was going to keep the ring. So we're lucky. We're lucky we had Sam. So yeah, that's a good fantasy point. I think of fantasy. I always think of like fantasy is always a precursor to sci-fi. So, like with Mass Effect and Dragon Age, both made by the same studio, I think of to get to technology, you have to come through fantasy to a certain extent. So, fantasy dystopias sort of have that built-in things can get better because technology will come along at some point. And like stuff like, and you're right about corporations. It's corporations that rule the dystopian worlds. You've got cyberpunk and alien isolation. You've got the Outer Worlds, although that is just transcendent satire on capitalism. And because it's basically if Amazon and what other so if you had Amazon and you had Tesla and Microsoft, imagine them owning a colony, a space colony. And so you've got the three main massive corporations that own different parts of it, and they're all trying to sell you their products. And so they captured that perfectly in the first one. But then you might think, well, what else is there to do satire about? You've gone into capitalism as much as you think you could, gone far enough into that. But then the second one, they've taken you to another colony where the main power is a theocracy. It's basically North Korea in space. So you've got your god leader and this like cult around them. And then the forces of capitalism come and invade. And I immediately go, thank God for that. The only thing worse than capitalism is something like North Korea. And so the people that I was hating from the first game, I was actually going, oh, I'm glad they're here from this one. And then that's like flipping it completely on its head again. But I think the dystopias, do you find that in dystopias, what is how common is it for it to be about saving the world from the dystopia or just making do within it? So like with cyberpunk, or I'll say alien isolation for a more extreme sample, you just live in that universe that is owned by the corporations. You're just an engineer on a ship. And like cyberpunk, you get a little look into the echelons of power, but you're not. How often is it about making do within the system or bringing down the system?
I think that's an interesting one, because the game I was going to bring up as an example for me is probably the Star Wars Jedi Survivor series, because that's right after Order 66. For those that don't know, that's the end of the original 3, when Order... I can't remember. But anyway, it's after the prequels, that's right. Sorry, get my head in the game. Come on, where's my Star Wars lore? It's after the Jedi are eventually obliterated, and Anakin becomes Darth Vader and kind of joined the dark side and stuff. So initially, you start as Cal Kestis, and he is very similar to an engineer working in a scrapyard, where he gets bits of old ships, starships, and breaks them up for scrap. And so you're starting off as essentially someone trying to survive in the Empire post Order 66, and then you get a tip off that you might not be the last Jedi left, and you sort of have to go and explore that and see if you can figure out whether you can find any more Jedi. If I remember correctly, it's been a little while since I've played both of them. But so it turns from being a survivor into being a force that can disrupt the regime and push back against it. Not necessarily save it, but begin the rebellion, I suppose.
Yeah, there's that feeling of, I don't know whether I got a bit fed up with the Jedi games.
I remember you saying, yeah.
The idea of like sort of like the I'm Spartacus thing of you want to be Spartacus,
yeah,
leading the revolution and taking down the empire, but how rarely that actually, well, how vanishingly difficult that feat is, purely because you are just one person and just building up a grassroots force trying to overcome the empire that is in power currently, and to actually make it feel like the subtleties and nuances of that make the overthrowing the empire feel like it's an attainable thing, because then it's not just about defeating your opponent, you have to put the world together after. And it's a very reductive thinking of that you just need to beat the bad guys and then everything will be fine. But one thing that Star Trek, the original series, does so well is that it's never just the Enterprise has to kill the bad guys or the monsters of the episode. Kirk finds a way to come out on top, but then almost always goes, right, we're here for peace. We've beaten you, and now we're going to prove that we're here for peace. We're not going to destroy you. We're going to start our relations with you, because you can't just kill all the enemy. That is it doesn't work, and also it's just a terrible idea in general. And that entire post-victory thing is an entire different thing to be thinking about. And if you've got a hero, your Spartacus figure, and you think, right, if they could win by killing the Emperor, and he killed the Emperor in a lightsaber battle, I would have absolutely no faith in him being able to corral a society after that, to have you think, oh yeah, once they've won, they'll know what to do to make things better, and then it'll just end up circling back again. Where to go next?
I did a little bit of research. You know how I like a little bit of research, if you don't mind me sharing that. So Perez Latour did some analysis into post-apocalyptic games, and he created these 3 utopian enclaves, which are basically like the framework for hope within the dystopian worlds in the game worlds. So he's got post-apocalyptic cowboys, which is about the sort of lone hero, sort of individual survival thing. And then he's got back to nature and do it yourself, which is sort of more agrarian, and this kind of, basically like connecting with the natural world and sort of getting all self-sufficient. And then the third one is community leaders, empathy, and rebelliousness. And I think it's quite interesting to think about games from that perspective. Like, what is it that gives you hope within these dystopian environments? Because if you play these games that are set in these post-apocalyptic dystopian, or not post-apocalyptic, just futuristic dystopians, then, something has to give you hope. Otherwise, it's just too bleak to play. And it's, we talked in the last episode about how it can bring you down if you spend too much time thinking about these sort of disaster scenarios, especially as many of them we are not able to individually control, except through voting. And we should always be voting. But so I think, like, what is it that these games do to give us hope? And I think, when you said about how many games are about beating that dystopian situation, and how many are about just sort of existing within it. And I think for me, the vast majority are just about existing within it. And as I think that's right, actually, because it's very difficult to beat a dystopian world. You might be able to tackle a small corner of it. You might be able to deal with a small aspect of it. But, are you really going to be able to, I don't know, deal with capitalism? Is one individual going to be able to deal with capitalism in a 100-hour game? No, probably not. And it's right that we don't give the impression that is how it works. But I do think that it's interesting to think about how as a player you gain hope within those apocalyptic or dystopian environments.
Yeah, a really good thing about Death Stranding is it's about connecting people. The Death Stranding, it basically isolated communities like from each other, because when we had these BTs, these beach things, these monsters that had appeared, and if one of those monsters catches a living person and eats them, it causes an antimatter explosion that just leaves a massive crater. So people leaving their shelters was too dangerous, and the communication methods between places had been massively disrupted because most of it was wireless. And but then communication is the least of your problems, because you can't move cargo between places. And the extent to which we are, you just think about Amazon parcels, the massive infrastructure that goes around that happening all the time. All of a sudden, that's completely stopped. And your goal in Death Stranding is a delivery on foot person, because there are no roads. So the only way to do it is through small vehicles and on foot. And you have to connect these disparate communities all across the continent that you're going around. And I think the first slide of the game, once you press start, is the first two tools that humanity created was a rope and a stick. A rope to beat back the monsters and a stick to bring us together. And that's a really powerful image to have. Another problem that comes up with thinking of overthrowing dystopias is that revolutionary thing of, right, we're all going to put aside our differences and come together and overthrow the dystopian government or corporations, and we'll do that. And think, oh yeah, if you had the right leadership and the right, because that's basically what unions are meant to be, everyone coming together and going, right, we're going to use our numbers and coalesce and use that as our power source to go and get the thing to get the better world. But then you look at, in the UK, one of the most privileged countries in the world, and America, we'll focus just on the UK because that's where we are. And then you see Reform UK, and you look at all those millions of people and going, you're going to ruin any kind of revolution that we try and do because they are fighting against us. And it still leaves me speechless when I watch any like social media post that I see about them. It's just that thing of going, how can this, I can't believe this. It doesn't seem possible that people are like this and that this is a scenario that's happening. And it just feels like all these people who believe those are movements. I just want to go up to them, and you think you can talk them out of it. You can explain them out of it. But for some reason that isn't a reliable way to deal with it, because you think you just need to go to them one by. What are you going to say?
I was just going to say, this is one of the reasons why I was quite interested in this research, because what I would like to know, he hasn't done this, but what I would like to know is to look at, like, how can you map the types of games and which of these categories they fall into in relation to the various social goings on at the time. So he makes a link between the 2008 crash and this idea of these dystopian worlds. But what he's looking at is that these are ways for gamers to explore the idea of how we would rebuild after a disaster. That it was kind of a way to work through the anxiety that was brought about by that 2008 crash. And as we talked about in the last episode, we've since had things like COVID and war in Europe and the destabilized US. So, there's a lot going on in the world that kind of triggers this need to kind of look at, like, well, what do we do if everything goes to crap? I would be interested to know, like, because I think there's a big difference, isn't there? Because to me, I feel like the sort of reform voters would probably be more into the lone wolf rebellion style mechanic rather than the I'm just looking at what he said, the lone wolf one, and that rather than the sort of back to nature, I can't see like anyone from reform, really engaging with the sort of back to nature situation for like rebuilding the world. Or, I'd be really interested to know how those kind of games, and also because the people that make the games there's a combination, isn't there? And we talked about this before in our episodes on indie games coming up this year and things like that. There's a difference between putting a game out to get maximum amount of sales and putting a game out because it's something that you're really passionate about. And so it would just be really interesting, I think, to look at that, because I think the sorts of games that either are being made or that are popular within this framework that he's suggesting would tell us a lot about what people think, what gamers think about humanity. What do they think are the ways that humanity might rebuild? So I just think that, like, you are linking it so well, Matt, to the current political situation. And I think that's one of the things that is fascinating about probably all fiction, but certainly about science fiction or speculative fiction, fantasy, is that we feel like it's about these fantastical worlds that are either far off in the future or, so magical and so different from ours. But really, they're stories about now. They're stories about when the writers are writing and the anxieties of that time. And games are the same. But the difference with games is that we can play them. We can engage with them.
We are... It's another area where the game developers, as with lots of TV and movies, the cowardice of neutrality when they are presenting some kind of scenario in art. Because what good art should be is a nuanced exploration of reality, so that, say, in Star Trek, awesome, this original series, having a Japanese man and a Russian man as the two helmsmen on the Enterprise in the 60s, after World War II and in the middle of the Cold War, that is there are no words for what that is. And having Uhura on the bridge, a black woman on the bridge, having one of my favorite episodes, there's a black admiral who outranks Kirk and is judge of Kirk being on trial, and the man who created the computers for starships is a black man. And throughout the original series, there are countless things that, watching them today, just is normal. Having a black woman on the bridge of a ship, if you did that today, that's just safe diversity. Because there's safe diversity, which is part of the problem with Star Trek Academy, the most recent one, is that they do the safe diversity. They don't do the controversial, but because it's controversial, it's more important to do it. Because if they could have just said it would be really controversial to have a black woman on the bridge, so we won't do it. When instead they went, it would be controversial to do this. We're going to do it because of that. At the hope that, because then you're reflecting society as it is. Here you go, this shouldn't be controversial, but it is at the moment. And so if we don't have it there, then we're not going to have a conversation about it. And so the stuff like the Reform UK right-wing stuff, developers and like the powers that be in these creative industries, they don't want to upset that portion of society, so they don't explore it in a meaningful way. And that is wildly frustrating when I see the gaps that leaves in the worlds that I'm playing in. Because the world, to probably immerse yourself, the world needs to make sense. And right-wing populism is a massive, massive part of why the world is the way it is. And that how governments and corporations react to that and fuel it and manipulate it to go, oh yeah, there's nothing to see there. It's just a thing that's going on. It's just people expressing their opinions, and it's beyond part of it. And the point of it is that it is a farce. It is insane. It is crazy and nonsensical, because once you've managed to get someone to detach from reason, then they're capable of anything. And then when we're getting close to a post-satire world, because the reality of the world is so insane that it can't be mocked, because you can't write things that are more insane than Trump. You can't write anything more satirical than Reform UK having a rally called the Unite the Kingdom rally. Because we're a kingdom. We are peasants in a kingdom. And so that blew my mind. Oh, okay. We're close to the end of the episode. Have any of you got any final thoughts?
So I was thinking, when you touched upon like representation within dystopian worlds and the importance of thinking about how dystopia impacts on everyone, not just a certain set of people. It made me think of the film The Day After Tomorrow, which is a very corny film. I don't know if you've both
Such
seen
a good film.
Awesome
film.
I know, right? It's the best. But I really would like, I was thinking about this, wouldn't it be cool to have a sequel that explores what happens when the West moves to the poorer parts of the world underneath the equator and then has to acclimatise to life under sort of, or at least through the generosity of the Southern Hemisphere? I think they kind of left the door open for that, but then a sequel was never made. And I just think it'd be very interesting to explore where that would take people and what would happen as a result. I mean, it's inevitable what would probably happen, which is probably not a good thing. But you could explore what happens when things are flipped around and the privilege of the West has to kind of take a step back and think, well, if we don't sit down and shut up, then we're not going to survive, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a real issue with ignoring this idea of an alternative way of doing things as well. I think that what we often see is that we see a future world that still has all of the issues that we have. And I think that's really why maybe that sequel hasn't been made, because those would be things that would have to be tackled, because it wouldn't be as business as normal. And I think you said I think it was in the last episode, Alex, when we were talking about COVID, and you said that, you know, a lot of people act like we had COVID and everything's gone back to how it was. And it hasn't.
No.
And you're right, but we don't really talk about it because I don't think we want to, as a society, accept that something could happen like that and could change everything. And I think that is the problem. I mean, I've talked a lot about the 2008 crash, because I do believe that was a real turning point in the world for politics. I think, you know, it's the root of Brexit. It's the root of why parties like Reform have a handle on have a hand round on necks, for goodness sake. You know, like it for me, it is fundamental. And the biggest problem with that was that as soon as things were settled, everyone said, right, let's get back to how it was before. And that was all it was. It was about getting back to how it was before. This kind of constant expectation that we're going to constantly things are going to be constantly bigger. Things are going to be constantly better. We're going to constantly make more money. We're going to constantly grow. Growth is everything. And that's why I'm quite sympathetic to things like the donut economy and all these other ideas that are really thinking outside the box. And they're saying, no, we don't want to go back to how things were, because that's what caused a lot of the problems of where we are now. What we want to do is look at new ways of doing things and different ways of doing things. And I do think that within this genre of storytelling, and I think because we've talked about films and we've talked about games, so within this genre, I think we really are lacking a mainstream desire to actually explore what those worlds would look differently. And we talked in a previous episode about Horizon, and we talked then about how there was so much of it where they didn't take the opportunity to really shift social norms and really challenge things and kind of go, okay, in this new world, these things have changed. And they didn't take those opportunities that in a way that we found disappointing. And I think that's another example of where there isn't this, most things are set in America or the West. We don't talk about the global South in these stories. We don't, a lot of it tends to be around violence rather than cooperation. So I think there is this real problem with that. It's sort of safe. I think you said that, Matt. It's safe. It's like exploring these things safe. Diversity and doing those sorts of things is just, it's tokenism if it's not genuinely pushing the boundaries.
Yes, I think the moral of the story today is fuck the 4BK and watch Star Trek, the original series. And yeah, and you'll always see me. I think the only shirts I wear are these. We don't have a video one anymore. Whenever you think of me, you'll see me wearing an awesome Star Trek, the original series shirt. So thank you everyone for listening. You know where to find us every Thursday. And if you want to watch us streaming on Twitch, you'll find us streaming on there a bit more. So thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Oops.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Gaming the System. If you want to support us, you can donate to us through our PayPal by sending it to wearegamingthesystem@gmail.com if you want to send us a one-off donation. If you want to donate to us monthly, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/gamingthesystem. Until next time, bye-bye.